who is Professor and President Rashmi Singh, was born in India and has lived in the United States since 1974. She's currently the President of the United Nations Association of Sonoma County. So if you want to get involved with the United Nations and work at Sonoma County, and she's also the CEO of Vida Books. Do I say the word right? Vida? Yeah, Vida Books, an online publishing company established in 2010. The prehistory of Vida Books, is actually older. Started in the late 80s and early 20s, Professor Singh published many educational book plans, lesson plans, and more about India as Vida Books. And Vida means education in Sanskrit. These booklets are her form of social intervention against the historical and social science reform for public schools in California and the cultural world that reform brought about. She also founded a nonprofit education about South Asian Vida, 501c3 group, a small volunteer group which can be found on EDUSA/Vida, DIVYA.org. Many of us also know Rashmi Singh in a different capacity. Professor Rashmi Singh is the Emeritus Professor of the Humanities program at SSU. She aspired to build a peace studies program on campus. She had taught at Sonoma State University in California since 1919. She was part of the team that co-teach the highly acclaimed interdisciplinary War and Peace lecture series at SSU. And the topic of today's talk is, you want to announce the topic?
Sure, the relevance of the United Nations.
Yeah, and let's welcome Professor Rashmi.
Can you close that door? Thank you. As you can see, I've been doing this for a while, and some of this series has been, my former colleagues have been asking me over every single year to talk about the United Nations, and what I had done is to update a version for today, and I'll stick to my notes and go over it with you. I want to deal first with the relevance of the United Nations, and then go into what is war, what is your opinion of war, and the reason why I do that is if people your age are asked to go fight in a war and lay their lives on the line, you should know what you are fighting for. And the third biggest topic that I'd like to cover is terrorism. Is it winnable, and is it even a war? What does that do to the Geneva Conventions, and where civilians are supposed to be off limits for as victims? And the last thing I'll touch on is ISIS, what and why that exists, and why we as a nation are at war with it. As a longtime faculty, we'll stay on this one for quite a long time. As a longtime faculty, I'll remind you all the who, why, what, when, where, plus your choice is very important in this series. This lecture series is really pretty simple, and yet it is also highly complex, truly worthy of being in the upper division GE section. It prepares you for the real world that you all will have to deal with one way or the other. These are very complex ideas. There is no simple answer, and there is no simple solution. And along the way, the idea is that you will have formed your own opinion, you will have learned how academic reasoning works, and what are the criteria on which you base it. So I'll start with the United Nations. What is the UN? Very briefly. Why it's relevant. and it also ties into your SSU mission statement in terms of global citizenship. So the United Nations, Chingling, may I have you go forward a few slides? Yeah, this one, and then go over a little more. Further up, that one, yes. So what is the UN? And you have the website addresses on the right side. In my updated version, which we don't have right now, I had put all the web addresses in red. But this is how the local to global, or working in reverse, the global, national, and local all tied together. So the UN is an international body. The United Nations Association is a national group of volunteers. And the Sonoma County chapter, and their Facebook address is there, is a local group. So one little note in the beginning, only nations are members of the United Nations, not individuals. All the countries in the world. However, people like you and I are involved as members to advocate for sanity in an insane world as a way to preserve our civil society. It also allows a way for the poor to have a place with the wealthy, because the United Nations, the dues for the United Nations are paid out of your taxes to the UN. It is based on a complicated formula based on the GDP, but we'll get to that in a little bit. So may I have the next slide, please? So the UN provides a forum where all humans through their governments are equal, no matter what their economic status, their gender, their race, their religion, or their nationality. So normally in an open system, the US is dominant by virtue of what the dollar can do and how many dollars we spend on our defense annually. But at the end of World War II, the United Nations was formed to provide a dialogue among the nations to resolve the conflict peacefully. So update to 2016, now the UN has a potential to do a lot more. May I have the next slide, please? Okay, we'll go on. I'm skipping on that one for now. Yes, so UNESCO. UNESCO stands for the UN Economic, Social, and Cultural Organization, and it does a lot for raising the standard of living, etc., for many people. WHO, any of you heard of the, not Ebola now, but Zika, right? How do you keep it from traveling from one country to the next country? These are the kind of issues the World Health Organization deals with. IAEA with Iran and Iraq and Syria, all these countries, they need an international neutral organizer to go in and evaluate whether these are active, whether these countries are saying what they have done or not done. Iran, for instance, many people don't trust it. So who verifies it? All the inspectors from the IAEA. Anybody been on a civil flight? ICAO, International Civil Aviation Organization. Who oversees that the food manufactured and cooked in one country is going to be safe and hygienic enough for everybody to eat? That falls to the UN. International Maritime Organization. If you look at your backpacks, your shirts, your pencils, your papers, whatever you've got, look at where is it made. How did it get from there to here? Who oversees that maritime trade? The UN does. UNHCR. The UN High Commissioner on Refugees, or High Commission on Refugees, does a lot to make sure that people who are fleeing war are safe. It doesn't matter as much over here, but in Europe for sure, this is a lot more. And the UN has kept up with the times, so WIPO, net neutrality, does that matter to anybody? What is net neutrality? So all those questions come up. And again, to make sure that everybody is on the same level playing field, the United Nations is the authority that arbitrates. FAO, Food and Agriculture Organization, how come you can eat food grown in China, in Chile, in other parts of the country that we consume here? Is it safe? What are the chemicals that it may or may not have been sprayed on? So those are things that the UN does for you every single day. ICC, International Criminal Court, and in this I will mention that the US is not a full member. Why not, you might ask? Because the United Nations implies that we are all on the same level playing field, and the US doesn't feel it can be on the same level as Cuba, as Israel, as Palestine, as China. So we don't want to have our generals be submitted to the ICC, because based on what happened after World War II, they would likely be convicted. In fact, it may come as a surprise to many of you, Henry Kissinger, who was an architect of many administrations, who essentially is barred from going to many countries because the ICC convicted him for war crimes. Because in the eyes of the ICC, everybody's even. If you did the crime, you have to do the time. So he cannot go into many nations. May I go into the next slide? So climate change is a big deal this year because the United Nations has got each and every nation in the world, including China and India, to agree to bring down the carbon emissions and the pollution that we are putting out into the world. According to most scientists in the world, we are at a turning point where unless we do the right things now, it will be a very difficult time for our children and grandchildren, even the unborn ones, because that's who we are really fighting this war for. So I mentioned in the previous year's presentation that there are a couple of other programs. The Model UN, IGMAN, is going to be held at UC Berkeley. If anybody's interested, I should mention what that is. Intergenerational Model United Nations, where you see people who are elderly, you see the young, and we are all trying to work on this notion that we can dialogue and that diplomacy will prevail. Because even after all the killing has been done and ended, hopefully, we still have to learn to talk. We have to decide what will be the terms of our treaties. So that's essentially, may I have you go on? So this is what is the latest on the UN Sustainable Development Goals. What are they? And if there is a graphic about multicolored, about 17 separate goals. Go up a little bit more. And you click on, the first one is ending hunger for everybody. Okay, click on the red link there, Sustainable Development Goals. Yes. And keep going down just a little bit. So those are the 17 goals. And if you click on any one of them, let's take one or two. The first one, for instance. It sounds very grandiose, but the UN is actually trying to do something. If you click on it, you get what are the targets. And if you click on any one of these are massive reports written by bureaucrats. And if you wanted to get the synthesis, this is what the synthesis says. And then you can go into further details. End poverty in all forms anywhere. So I let you do that at home because this is going to be a long okay. All right. So sustainable development topics, then it's divided up by region. First, your choice is you can get it in 5 different languages all at once. You pick which language you choose, and then second choice you have is what part of it, what part of the country, what part of the world you're looking at, etc., and you go from there. I won't, since I don't have my particular presentation, I'll just go. Does the UN have anything to do in the United States, or is this all for the rest of the world? What do you think? Does it have anything to do with us here? Does the water in Flint, Michigan bother anybody? If I was living in Flint, I would certainly be bothered by it. Now, if we all have access to clean water, why does Flint, Michigan not have clean water? So these goals, the human rights, etc., this doesn't just apply to other places, it applies to us here. Another thing I would mention is, do Black Lives Matter? I have black friends. Certainly it matters. Did building the freeway system that bypassed and bifurcated many inner cities cause white flight into suburbs? Therefore, it was easy to ignore this part of the community because we never saw them as we drove from our suburbs into our work spaces. Do you think that's a logical explanation for some? Absolutely. Professor at UCSD, who taught my daughter, actually does believe that, and it is very true. Economic opportunity for jobs, education, and disparity. Even in Marin County, it was on the news lately, that money is being diverted to private magnet school from public money. And the predominantly minority district has been left behind. Why? How can that happen? Look it up. Don't take my word for it. And do Black Lives Matter? So all of these are relevant issues. Or as some, I should say, Mr. Donald Trump has suggested, and some people are able to carry guns in classrooms in Texas. Should we just arm everybody and let them loose and make up their mind? Whoever has the biggest, fastest gun gets to decide the outcome. Not academic reasoning, not logic. So these are the issues that we are absolutely trying to help deal with. So in order for the United Nations to function, there is definitely a role, but first the killing has to stop, and the second thing is people have to be able to learn how to dialogue with each other. Do you think that makes sense? Or should we simply kill every single Muslim in the world and that'll be problem solved? Can we do that? We had smart bombs, quote unquote, in the last war, or the still continuing war in Iraq. Did we have smart people? I'm not so sure. The UN has a mechanism in place. If there is a dispute, you go to the Security Council and sit down in a forum at a table that is large enough to accommodate all sides, and you present your case. And when under the first President Bush, the case was made that Iraq had gone into Kuwait, that was seen as a reasonable and logical aggression. And the UN said, yes, you are authorized to go in and restore order. So that was called Desert Storm. We did not, quote, finish the job, in the opinion of some. And many people said that Clinton was simply Bush interrupted. Bush Sr., Bush Jr. And so when President Bush, number 43, W. Bush, went in there and started the shock and awe, as it was called, the military campaign, he presented the case to the UN Security Council, but the UN Security Council did not agree. There was no clear objective. And therefore, that war was illegal, or is illegal. So another option that exists is freezing money. We froze the money of Iran. You think that can work? You freeze their assets. Most people are not going to be able to function in a normal manner. And for a long time, we had frozen the assets also of Cuba and other countries. But the hopeful thing is that if people are willing to talk, the UN does provide you with an alternative. If people are not going to willing to talk, you can't force them to talk. They have to be willing to agree on the parameters of peace. So we know enough that certain things cause war and unrest. For instance, the water in Michigan, in Flint. If you go poison somebody's water, is there going to be unrest? Logically, yes. Are they going to blame the people in power? Yes. So we know the cause and effect. If people are hungry, they will steal. Right? No? Okay. So if you spread disease or bacteria, will there be war? Absolutely. Germ warfare, right? You will have a lecture on that from our physicist, right? So deprivation, that's what's caused the refugee influx from many parts of the world into Europe. So we know enough about what causes war. We also know what causes peace. So why can we not break out of this cycle? Because we have been clear about what causes war, and we have seen, any history majors here? No? Okay. Many of you may have heard that World War I caused World War II. Whether you agree or disagree, the United Nations was formed at the end of World War II to prevent World War III from happening. So the United Nations was created in San Francisco, and in a couple of years we will have the 75th anniversary in the building where the papers were signed in the War Memorial Hall, because the hope is that sane people will be able to prevail. Some people, when they don't do the right thing, it becomes very difficult, and people start to blame the United Nations. Okay, the United States is large enough to be able to take the blame, but many people would have said, follow the money, correct? If you want to find out what's going on. You had Andy already present, Andy Merrifield. You had Peter Phillips, his presentation last week. So some people say that the United Nations has become the most expensive debating society, where every representative of the country gets up, of every country, gets up and wants to make his country's position known and heard. Is that valid? Well, people definitely do want to be heard. What happens when you ignore them is not very good. So the United Nations works on a budget of $4.9 billion globally. What do we spend on the defense budget militarily every single year? I know, because many of you have your smartphones and computers out. $640 billion was a budget number for military spending last year. And contrast that with the United Nations, which has only $4.9 billion. It's just as if everybody's seen what Salazar Hall, the administration wing, looks like. Do all your classrooms look like that on this campus? Is something wrong with that picture when the two don't match? So, what do we spend per student in California? Roughly $10,000 a year. What do we spend on every single prisoner in California? Anybody got the figure for that? Roughly $47,000 a year. And as our prisoners age, with 3 strikes, you're out. Remember that law? The number goes up exponentially because you have to lock up some people forever. But is the cost of that affecting your education and that of my children and grandchildren? The people who've done no wrong, who are innocent, we don't spend money on. But the people who've committed crimes, we're so afraid of that. And we want to lock them up and throw away the key. So those are some of the issues that you all have to deal with. Some people also say that the Security Council, which has as its permanent members China, France, Russia, UK, and USA, it is time to rethink this because the most populous nations, India, Brazil, etc., are left out. Why? At the end of World War II, remember, India was just about free, but not quite. And these are the people who got left out of the UN. But the more appalling fact is that China, France, Russia, UK, USA, and Israel are the biggest arms dealers globally. So if the UN says we are for peace, and at the same time those same countries who are the permanent members are making the most money selling arms, is that going to work? but you cannot force somebody into morality or civility. So, why do wars still happen? Is it simply because we have a shoot first and ask questions later mentality? Money? Money? So the second part is whoever wins the war, to the victor go the spoils of war, right? The people who lost their lives, that's a separate and terrible issue in itself. But are the people who are doing the killing, are they any happier? You'll have a veterans panel in a few weeks. The veterans are absolutely miserable. Many of them are committing suicides, more than 20 every single day. What's going on? If the US veterans are killing themselves when they come home, so we have to figure out that war is not working at some point. But we're still not there, because since roughly the year 1500 CE, we are at war with somebody or the other. And George W. Bush, number 43, his administration, there was an effort to make perpetual war. What does that mean? It means that money, as you said over here, is forever going to dominate. Many people decide that war is a business, and if it's profitable for them, what used to be called Halliburton is now called ZXE. They're doing pretty well. How come? Again, you have to question this, and this is what this class is supposed to be about. We have now in 2016 got to the point where our planet is almost destroyed. You know, I don't know how many of you know that we have floating plastic garbage from the US that is floating around in the Pacific. How many of you have taken or seen the course or the video called The Story of Stuff? Somebody must have. One only? Huh. Oh. Plastics that are floating in the Pacific Ocean, created by the people of the United States, that nobody wants to claim responsibility for. Anyway, there are efforts to try and solve that by going to our Sustainable Development Goals, and every country is putting out less and less garbage. So we can see what the problem is, and along come some people with this theory called Gaia. Gaia, I'm not sure how you pronounce it, G-A-I-A. And this theory says that the planet Earth has a functioning, intelligent brain. And this brain is telling the Earth, human beings are a parasite. So we have a lot of cancers, we have a lot of disease, we have wars. You think that is likely to happen? These are scary theories. Any environmental studies majors here? ENSP. Okay, you've heard of this theory, right? So are these, who's heard of Rachel Carson? What was her claim to fame? Why do we have, I'm so sorry to ignore you, but we do need to get some of these issues on the ground. Otherwise there will be no progress. Who was Rachel Carson? Hutchins School of Liberal Studies and the ENSP program are located in a building named after her. Why is a building named for her? She discovered that DDT was killing the eggs of some of our birds. And since then, DDT has been banned. So when we know the cause, can we change the effect? So the logical question becomes, if we know war is not making us happier, it's not winning enough for the victors, which is you and I as Americans, who is it working for? Just the businesses who trade in death? So these are logical questions that do need to be tackled. But before you get all confused and think this is too complicated for me to answer and too complicated for me to deal with, at issue is a very simple statement. Conflict, how to avoid it, and how to make it better. That's all that the War and Peace lecture series boils down to. And your answers will be important. So what is war or conflict? It's about power and domination at its very simplest basic sense. It can be military, it can be economic, it can be cyber, or it can be spiritual too. Let me give you examples of each. Military, or better still, let me have you give me answers. What is a war? Can you give me an example of a good military war? World War I, okay. What was the issue there? Anybody else chip in? Okay. Economic wars. Have we had economic wars? For instance, with Cuba and with Iran, partly, we tried to screw them economically so that they would come around to our way of thinking, didn't we? Have we had cyber warfare? You're all too young to remember, but in the year 2000, we had a lot of people saying that because the computers will not be able to keep up with the transition to 2000, because the computer code is all 0101, things would be haywire, and everybody was starting to pull money out of banks, or some people were. But if Russia can mess with our elections, if Russia can mess with our voting machines, is it a fair election? Your guess is as good as mine. Let's hope it doesn't happen. Although, to hear the Republican side, strangely, it will likely happen because the election is. Okay, I'll get off my. Can a war be spiritual? World War II, in a way, was spiritual. Right? We wanted to get rid of the racist Nazi philosophy which said that one race is better than the other. Right? So, enforced domination, in other words, I make you suffer more than I suffer until you submit to my will, is what a war is. And this is a quote from a civil rights movement in the 1960s. So when one person imposes his or her will on another, it is conflict, it is war. If it is enforced by a whole group, it becomes institutional power, as when slavery happened, right, historically. And on a playground in schools, bullying has sometimes gone out of proportion. So we do not allow bullying on the playground in our public schools. Do we allow nations to bully others? Why? What we don't allow our children to do, why do we let nations do? Because it's called nation building. In other words, it's empire building. They are going to be stronger. So I'd like to take a few minutes to go over what is Islam and why we have such a problem with it now. Some Muslims are, let me back up a little bit. Islam was started by the Prophet Muhammad. And after saying Muhammad, most Muslims will say, peace be unto him, P-B-U-H. So that is really the origin of the word Islam also. Among Muslims, the debate started, who takes on the mantle of Muhammad after his death? And that single war is still happening today. Shia and Sunni are the two main branches of Islam. They have never got along with each other. They have always been trying to replace the other with themselves. Sunni are the Saudi Arabians. I'll just mention one nation per group, although many have divided populations. And Shia is the one that is represented by Iran. Iran and Saudi Arabia have never gotten along. So their internal debate is, do you go by the teachings, which is what Saudis do, or do you go by the lineage, which is what Iranians do? Muhammad has died. He has no sons. So how does the lineage come in? The lineage became his son-in-law and his sons. And Saudi Arabia says it is about teachings. About 1.5 billion with a B Muslims are Sunni, and about 10% Muslims worldwide, roughly 200 million, are Shia. So they have been having this debate and been at each other's throats until recently. And the only reason now they are against the United States and all our allies is because they all point their fingers to us. It was their internal debate. It was a similar debate that happened in Christianity way back in Westphalia in 1648, when Catholicism, with Martin Luther King, etc., was a Reformation happened, and Catholicism was reformed. But now, thanks to our interventions, both Sunni and Shia Muslims are both saying they hate the US and they want to destroy it. So that is the reason why we go to war. How did we insert ourselves in the middle of that debate? I don't know. 9/11 happened, yes. Where were most of the perpetrators from? You're again too young, but I was teaching here at the time. Most of the perpetrators were Saudis. Saudis, and they were Shias. They wanted to replace the Sunni majority. So why did we go into Iraq? Why didn't we go into Saudi Arabia if the war was in retaliation? Any answers? Any questions? Yes, it is. Okay, higher. So why did we go into, not go into Saudi Arabia? Why did we go into Iraq? Or Afghanistan? Okay. Okay. So how many people were killed on 9/11? Roughly 3,000 plus. How many US military personnel have died in these wars in both Iraq and Afghanistan? Anybody have a number? Can you say that a little louder, please? Okay. So there are variations on the number because sometimes about 5,000 roughly. But I'm not even sure of that because online when I tried to look it up, and some of you maybe will have better luck than I do, because civilian casualties, do you count them? Do you not count them on the other side? Did we inflict damage on the people that we killed there? Certainly. And President Bush was not a very reasonable person when it came to President George W. Bush, number 43. When it came to explaining, for instance, the privatization plan that he had for Social Security, which I will be eligible for in a couple of years. So, but on one thing he was absolutely clear. He said, America is addicted to oil. Are we? So what makes us think that our oil is in somebody else's ground? Frontline did an excellent documentary, The House of Saud, and you may want to look that up or put that on your list if you want to really explore what is going on regarding oil. Are we addicted to oil? Did we have the war in Iraq because of all the oil-producing countries? Saddam Hussein was the only one who said that he wants to sell Iraqi oil in not US. So the Shia and Sunni debate, do you think as Americans we will be able to provide Muslims with an answer to the historic battles that they have been having? So why are we there in those two countries? Oil, money, and as I said before, perhaps because Saddam Hussein wanted to sell Iraqi oil not in US dollars, which is the unwritten rule in world business, but in his local currency. Is that why we went into Iraq? Many people claim it is. So the debate in Islam between Shia and Sunni, we're not going to be able to solve. And if we look at US history too, in the Civil War, did God take a side? Both sides were praying to their God for them to be successful. Does God really care whether we were at war with each other or not? Probably not. But then, one of the very interesting questions that arises from that is your God loving or is your God vengeful? So, in this class, please follow the logic, follow the discussion in your discussion sections, and go over exactly what you want to achieve, and don't be afraid to have yourselves discuss this with your classmates in the safety of your sections. I would suggest to you, and this again I apologize for not having the right slides up there. Don't give in to your fears. Don't give in to the world's fears. And I hope in your lives that hope and not negativity will prevail. And I'm quoting the woman who wrote Eat, Pray, and Love when I say that. Anybody seen that movie? Read the book? Oh, good. This is one of her latest books that says that people shouldn't give in to what you want to do. So complex thinking, as this course makes you familiar with, is possible. It is doable. It is easy to connect what's going on in Flint, Michigan, Black Lives Matter, the climate change, and locally for us, the United Nations. Because it gets to the very heart of what your course is about. Change can be made to happen, and you can join any one of the groups that exist locally, because this is, again, global to local to personal. So make sure you can do this with like-minded people. One of the speakers who will be speaking to you in one of the later lectures, Michael Nagler, had this wonderful advice. He says, don't worry about starting or ending war, just begin peace. And how do we do that? With yourselves. Can you be peaceful? Can you turn off that little, I call it the idiot box, that's on, always giving us the bad news every single hour of the day, no matter what day or night? So turn off the TV, give yourselves a little break, and hopefully we can make some change happen. And as Mahatma Gandhi said, there is no way to peace. Peace is the way. So UN.org is the address for the United Nations. UNFoundation.org is the national organization of volunteers. It was started by Ted Turner when the United States was delinquent in what it owed the United Nations for its membership. So if you do, I'm sorry? Okay. So it was started by Ted Turner and his very rich friends. Who is Ted Turner? Jane Fonda's husband, yes, but what is his claim to fame? What did he do? Anybody know? Okay, great. So, but and student memberships are free. You do not have to pay, otherwise people like myself have to pay to be a member of the UN.org. If you do go online to unfoundation.org and do become a free student member, please make sure that you give the Sonoma County and your university a little bit of credit. My email address is singhr, S-I-N-G-H-R @sonoma.edu. And you have seen this before. I open this to Q&A. Chingling, may we go to the last two slides, please? The very last two. That's one, because from space, there are no borders. It looks like a beautiful Earth. And then the last one is John Lennon singing Imagine, and the address is there if you can go back one and on Imagine. One more. There. One ahead, yes. Click on that link. Yes. Just listen to the words of this song before I open it up for question and answers. If you have questions, comments. Yes. Okay. For Sonoma. Okay. So, absolutely correct. What we do is a lot of advocacy. So, talk to people who think that the UN should be totally defunded, is one. And two is we talk to a lot of people, like in the year of the climate change. A friend of mine, we have a collaboration with the Northern California Earth Institute, and Elaine Wellen in sociology is part of another group that is planting redwood tree saplings, cleaning up local creeks, whatever your interest is. Join others who are doing similar things, and we can do all of that too. The Peace and Justice Center puts out a free newspaper called the Peace Press, and I believe the current issue, somewhere in the back page, they've got us doing activities, so you can do plenty. And on the back of the Peace Press is the email addresses of all your congressional, up from the president down to the local city council person. All their contact information is there. Get in touch with somebody if you feel strongly about something. Make a change. You can make it happen, although I know that John Lennon was a dreamer for sure, but many of us who are still around are trying to make change happen. Yeah. ISIS. Okay, ISIS is, I think, I'm sorry I don't retain as much since Google is so popular in my mind, because everybody can Google everything. So ISIS is a group that belongs to the Shia branch, and they want to impose the caliphate. This is, they will be telling women how to dress, they will be imposing flogging, etc., which is still done in Saudi Arabia. They literally stone people to death. So it's not just women aren't allowed to drive, but women have to stay within the parameters imposed by society. And is that Islam? According to many, it's not. But that's what the reality on the ground is. So any U.S. Armed Services personnel, female personnel, who are there have to be covered from head to toe in order to go anywhere off the military base. All kinds of ISIS, more than that, I don't want to get into because A, I don't know too much myself, and B, a lot of it is available online. A lot of it is available online, and its religion is a touchy subject. I'm not a Muslim, I'm not a Christian, I'm not a Jew, I'm a Hindu and a Buddhist, so. Terrorism, okay. I would like to pass on that part, ISIS in the US, because a lot of the groups like Southern Poverty Law Center, etc., are doing a lot more than I can. And splc.org, you can find a lot of information. Or even the FBI's website. Sorry. It's too big a topic to get into in our limited time. So I briefly touched on it, the terrorism, because their idea is they want to impose their will on our will to be different. Absolutely. Absolutely. But remember, somebody has to bring it forward on the Security Council. And then somebody has to have an open debate about it. But as I said, God doesn't take sides in any conflict. And that may not even, this is an internal debate between the Shia and the Muslims. This is not a debate non-Muslims can solve for Muslims. This is, they have to decide how Islam will be or not. Any other questions? Yes.
How does the UN intend to address our global environmental interests and asking them to forego their economic interests in order for the world to
I missed part of it. Can I have you repeat this?
How does the UN, because the UN wants peace and equality in the world and human rights, how does the UN intend to address powerful commercial interests? How do they intend to convince them that their economic interests needs to be let go for the world to be better?
That is the same problem that we're having in the US society as a whole. How many of you had learned about the United Nations in your high schools? Quite a few. Okay, good. I'm glad it's working better than it normally shows. Much smaller hands, number of hands go up. In society too, we want to do things that are better, that are quicker, that are more in terms with money, what will give us the easy results. And unfortunately, that is not the way to peace. But for some reason, people think that we will live forever and we will take what we've created. The Dalai Lama has the best quote on this. He says, "We come into the world with nothing and we leave the world with nothing. But in the middle, we want to accumulate everything we can." And I had a relative pass away recently. All the wealth and the money doesn't stop a person from getting sick, from dying. These are the same questions that the Buddha asked many, many thousands of years ago. So these things are, it's part of the human condition. It's part of democracy. You believe something, but you let the other person believe whatever he or she wants as well. And it's the same with nations. In the UN, every nation is supposed to have its own sovereignty, correct? So the native tribes can definitely be part of the UN, and they are. But you cannot impose your will on another nation. So it's raising everybody, looking out for your brother in the biblical sense. Any other last questions? Okay, Chingling, thank you for inviting me. Thank you for being here.
Right, being a global citizen and do your share. I think a place for solution. In a way, and I think that Professor Singh had already shown us the importance of relevance, the importance of not giving you and I as an option. And for so many wars, UN hasn't been able to actually be part of an important plan of solution, right, for peace. And it's important for us, for this generation and ongoing to recognize that it's important to actually make UN relevant. It's important to actually bring the issue to all nations rather than resolving among a few powerful nations and so on. So I hope that this will be part of the message that we will keep